Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Ask Me Anything, sponsored by the School of Information and Library Science at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. My name is Brian Sturm, and I will be the MC for today's event. We have three panelists for you today. We have Mohammad Jarrahi, we have Arcot Rajasekar, also known as Raja, and Rob Capra. And before we get going, though, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. And if you have questions for any of the panelists, please make sure to, in the description box in the YouTube channel, please make sure to submit those, and I will do my best to get them included as part of the ongoing conversation with each of the panelists. So our first panelist today is Mohammad Jarrahi, and we'll wait as we transition over to him. Mohammad, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing pretty well. We've got a rather rainy and blustery day as Ian comes moving its way northward. We haven't felt too many effects here in Chapel Hill, but I guess Durham and surrounding areas are getting a little bit more of the, bearing a little bit more of the brunt of this storm. Are you doing okay back there?
Yes, I think so, so far.
Okay. Well, if for our viewers, if either things go flickery or suddenly Mohammed disappears, that's the reason for it. He's not willfully disengaging. It will be an internet problem or something along those lines. Hopefully we won't have any of those issues. Well, Mohammed, let's go ahead and get going. Can you start just by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm an associate professor here at the School of Information and Library Science. And for a while, I've been studying new work arrangements, the work that is happening at the edge of the organizations, outside of the organizations, and specifically how information communication technologies increasingly play an important role in these new forms of works. Whether they are enabling them or constraining them, I've studied different types of arrangement, including mobile work, gig work. I studied digital nomads, and more recently, since looking at the gig work, I got interested in the impact of intelligent technologies like artificial intelligence in managing those work settings. My recent work has been focused on the role of artificial intelligence in transforming work.
Okay. Can you, for all of us, can you explain the term that you used, digital nomads?
Sure. So digital nomads are, when I was studying mobile knowledge workers, I came across this extreme form of mobility. People who many of them have actually given up the idea of a fixed home and fixed office and basically traveling the world. And that could have, the reason that they use the term nomad, because some of them are inspired by nomadic practices of old days. So some of them spend their winter in warm places and they come back to Europe in the summer. But the idea here is they do not have a fixed place of work and home in most cases. And they spend a lot of time in different places. They move a lot. And that's what is encouraged within that community. I got interested in this community because of the extreme forms of mobility these people present.
Yeah.
And I think after COVID, we've seen a resurgence in attention. More people are doing it, more researchers, more companies are interested in the space because COVID, interestingly, unleashed more of these, work arrangements.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the one that pops immediately to my mind is I had a friend growing up who became a waiter, and then he decided to, he enjoyed the food industry so much that he decided to travel and be a food journalist. And he spent his whole life just wandering around the world, and writing about his experiences. So would that be considered a digital nomad? And if
Yes,
so,
yes.
what other kinds of positions would fill that?
So most of these people engage in what I call digital work, the work that can be done across different places and different. I mean, digital content creation is a big, category, big genre of digital nomad work. Work that can be done basically from different places. You're not attached to one company, one a spatial time zone, one location. So anything that can be done digitally, and increasingly we see those types of work like web programmers, digital marketers. These are pervasive type of jobs and position among these workers.
So is that are all of those workers going to be working sort of gig? Are they part of the gig economy or
Not necessarily. So after COVID, given that we've seen a norm about working from home, some people affiliated with bigger organizations are now becoming digital nomads, and many companies are more receptive of the idea of working from other places. And if you can work from your home, there's no need to drop by the office. You can be in Indonesia. I mean, as long as you can handle the time difference and other constraints, that doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And many countries are now issuing the digital nomad visas and encouraging these workers to stay, longer, because in countries that you can visit without a visa, typically there's a time limit, like 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Now countries are giving visas to attract these people.
Interesting. So this is the sort of extreme version of work from home then, but home is mobile.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you know whether people are doing this sort of from recreational vehicles and things like that? I mean, are they literally on the road all the time?
Yes, we've got a group of people who work from a van, but then you can travel. If you're in the US, you can take your van to Europe or elsewhere, but we've got a group that, basically live out of a van, and they transform their van to a home, and, they go to places, they get internet, some of them mobile internet. But yes, van working from, caravans, van, RVs is a genre.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, it's sort of the bohemian lifestyle returning in a digital kind of way. That's great. So I was looking at your web bio, and it says current research projects explore the salient technological and information-centric challenges of mobile knowledge work. What kinds of challenges are these people facing?
I think the biggest one is maintaining the work rhythm. The stability and being attached to space and time, it comes with certain type of enablements and helps for your work. Now that you have to move across different spaces and places, you lose that opportunity and luxury. So you got to pack and unpack your workplace. And that workplace in this case is increasingly digital.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask a lot of people, where's your workplace, they refer to a digital technology, a digital device, their laptop, sometimes, even not a laptop, people working from their mobile devices. So that's an opportunity, but at the same time, a challenge, because how can you maintain productivity in different time zone and different places across different, countries? How can you access, these come with non-trivial challenges in terms of information and technology management. How can you manage information? How can you secure information if you are using a Wi-Fi in a cafe? Because you might be working with confidential information of your clients. These people, one really important things that I tell the students is, even if you are the most independent worker in this world, you go completely independent, you have to work with teams and organizations. That doesn't mean that you have to serve teams and organizations. Some of these people work with bigger organizations that have specific rules and policies in terms of information access. Mm-hmm. So that is a big challenge. That comes with understanding of how you manage technology, how you manage your time, how you manage your information. And some of that information does not belong to you. that adds another layer of complexity.
Right. Right. I assume connectivity would be a fundamental issue as well. I mean,
Yes, you can assume, even in the US, we've got digital divide. If you just,
yeah.
you've been experiencing it, right? Miles away from downtown Chapel Hill, the internet access is not given.
Mhm.
That's not guaranteed. You can't, assume you'll have the same type of, bandwidth for,
Yeah.
say, Skype communications, Zoom communications.
Yeah. And the issue you mentioned about sort of the space, the work rhythm that you develop when you have a distinction between an office and work time and home and non-work time. The work from home sort of mashed those two together because then the office became the home. But now you've got the further issue with these digital nomads that the office is collapsible because it's a laptop, right? It isn't a place. Or the office and the home are identical in the concept of a van. So even your office isn't part of the living space; it is the living space. So is this distinction between the office and work life? They always talk about work-life balance, right? How do you negotiate that when your life has become your work in some senses for these digital nomads?
That's a great question. It doesn't just apply to digital nomads. Anyone who's been working from home would testify, would tell you, how important that distinction is. It's hard, and digital technologies often can exacerbate the situation. Given that you can get notifications about work at 10 p.m. and there is always, the push to reply back to those, and engage in work in one way or another. So if I want to just zoom out, every work setting that I studied, there is one big common denominator, and that's flexibility. Flexibility is a double-edged sword. It comes with benefits. You can work from everywhere. I mean, different places, different time.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the biggest challenges and unintended consequence of flexibility is the conflation of personal and professional life. You don't know when your personal life ends and when your professional life starts. And as I noted, digital technology is a big culprit here. It contributes to that conflation because back in the day, the distinction that came from industrial age was you come home, you don't have access to work resources. Right now, your work resources are absolutely at your disposal everywhere you go, and work communication does not stop when you leave the office if there is a physical office. So I think the biggest strategy I've seen people exercise is just mindfulness in different forms. Mm-hmm. Mindfulness of your work, your time, and technology use.
Yeah. So that sort of time management, and it becomes increasingly important so that you have self-care time and time for things other than work being 24/7. Yeah, that makes sense. Can we do a little shift of course here, because you've talked in an article that I was reading about yin and yang, and that concept I find fascinating. And you related in that work to the sort of objective and subjective natures of information. Can you explore that a little bit with us?
A quick, overview. Information is an open system. Any open system, to sustain itself, it requires two forces. I would say one force that encourages stability, the other force would encourage adaptability and what I call generativity. We see, and these two forces from outside, they may look as opposing forces, but they are actually complementary. They help each other. They bring the system to the balance. You can imagine a lot of systems that are very flexible. There is no what we call install base to it. They do not persist, or the system is too rigid. It does not create opportunities for adaptation. So very simple. In that article, we said this information, whether we like it or dislike it, has these both objective and subjective aspects to it. The objective aspects of information preserve its shape, stability over time. The subjective aspects open us up for interpretation, allow adaptability and generativity of that information for different contexts, different users. That's how I applied yin-yang in this context. And they interact with each other. They are not independent forces. They mutually shape each other.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And the yin yang as a symbol does exactly that with the interlocking pieces that are opposite, usually opposite in color, opposite in orientation, and yet unified into the circle.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that brings me back then to the original discussion we were having about the digital natives and the digital nomads and this idea of balance, right? Because here you're talking about balance between stability and adaptability of the information. And before you were talking about the balance between work and life. So do you find that this sense of balance, of equilibrium, is sort of pervasive across your work, or is it just these two that I'm sort of harping on?
Well, I look at a lot of dichotomies that they look dichotomous, but they are not. They are opposing forces that bring each other to balance. And any good system design, whether you're using UX mentality or you're taking a information analysis type of approach, requires to arrive at a balance. And balance means different things. One of the ways that balance plays out in my work is understanding different stakeholders. They have different ideas, they have different ideals, they have different values. And in many cases, these stakeholders' values and interests are at odds with each other. So at the end of the day, the best approach to design a system, to put a system into use, is reconciling those interests rather than, integrating one of them. Or there's no absolute position. The best design mentality, the best design approach is about bringing things into the middle. And that middle means different things in different contexts, given the forces that shape those contexts.
Right. And as you try to achieve that balance in design, then are there particular techniques that you employ, or is it just a frame of mind? Or
in terms of that stakeholder perspective, stakeholder analysis is a thing that help us, or value sensitive design help us to understand the whole ecosystem of people. And some of those people are not necessarily the direct users of the system, but people who might be affected by your system downstream. So understand it. This is very important in how we design AI system, because some of the people who might be discriminated against, they are not direct users of the system. They might be people who apply for a loan, and they do not have access to the system itself. The bank runs the system or uses the system. So understanding all these, often in my work, I take an ecosystemic perspective. Mm-hmm. Understanding the whole information ecology and all types of actors that come in that, they shape that ecology.
Right. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time, Mohammad. I could talk to you for a long time. And this is fascinating work that you're doing with this sort of mobile work. But we are going to stop, and we'll transition over to our second panelist, who is Arcot Rajasekar. Raja, hey, welcome. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing fine. How are you?
All right, I'm doing great. Thanks for joining us, and looking forward to a good conversation here about your work at the School of Information and Library Science, and at RENCI possibly as well. I see your iRod's background there. It's certainly a large part of what you do, but certainly not only what you do. So can you introduce yourself to our audience and sort of tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm a faculty at the School of Information and Library Science, and I've been here for close to 15 years now. And I also work as a chief data scientist at Renaissance Computing Institute for data area, basically. And I've been involved in multiple things, all data, for a long time.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure you're allowed to talk about this, so I'm going to ask, but I know you've been involved recently in a huge grant endeavor collaborative grant with many, many institutions and many different PIs or collaborators. Are you at liberty to talk about that?
I can talk a little bit about that. Sure. This is a grant which we are proposal which we wrote to NSF on called the Science and Technology Center grant. NSF does this every two years or so, and use a lot of money for starting a new center. And I have been interested in this particular area called exposomics for maybe around 4 or 5 years now. To our audience who are not familiar with the word exposomics, it's basically the study of all the exposure which one can go through in an individual lifespan, and how it connects and correlates with the effects of your lifestyle and your disease, and finally your death, in a sense. So it is basically, you're looking at the whole lifetime of exposures, both chemical and recently we are also talking about social exposures and digital exposure, because you are now have a digital twin of yourself in the social media world, and how that affects you, and studying that type of is an important thing. Even though we have been working on and doing research in genetics and trying to find cures using genetics and successfully doing that, it has been realized that genetics offers maybe around 70 to 90% of the disease are not because of genetics. 70 to 90% are basically due to the exposure you are going through. It's basically the difference between nature and nurture. Nature plays some role, but nurture plays a larger role. And we haven't had a science where we look at this particular aspect of nurture until now. So in that particular sense, the exposomics is a young science. I think the work was coined basically around 2005, and people started doing research around 2010. So it is like around 10 years old. And only recently, when I say recently, only a few months back, the first journal for this particular science has been started. So in a sense, it's not taught anywhere. It's a completely new science. And I'm fortunate to work with a whole bunch of people across multiple institutions when we propose this particular project or a center to NSF.
Okay, so when you talk about exposomics, then do you define that as broad? I mean, like Mohammad was talking about the ecosystem, the entire ecosystem to which we are exposed, or is this focused predominantly or entirely on digital technologies and the exposure?
No, not at all. Actually, it involves multiple sciences. For example, you're looking at biology and genomics and other types of omics, metabolomics or adaptomics and things like that at one end, where we are looking at how the cells get changed because of these exposures, going up from the cell level to the organ level to the human level to the community level, and how they get affected by different types of exposures. For example, now we have a large hurricane, and it has changed the type of exposure people are getting in Florida, and particularly in areas where they had high flooding and all that. And yesterday, I was really listening to NPR, and one of the things they mentioned is that they're telling people don't even touch the water because you don't know what it contains. So the contamination is something really big. And the same thing happened at North Carolina when we had that particular spill of the PFAS chemicals. PFAS chemicals are called forever chemicals. They have a tendency to some people have a tendency, if they get exposed to PFAS, to have cancer because of that. So there was a very, very, very big push for that. I was also involved in that particular one called the PFAS network, which was funded by the state government of North Carolina, involving like around 20 plus universities in that particular one, where we gathered a lot of data about the dissemination of PFAS across the state, in the water, in the soil, in animals, and so on. So that is the level of exposure you can get into. And so to do that, you need to have environmental science people, you need to have sensors, You need to have chemistry, physics, all sorts of things. Hydrology, geology, because the way things spread and how they are going to go, the water tables. So it is basically an integration of almost every science you can think of, from air pollution to water pollution to nutrition, actually, because we eat a lot. And one of the big contamination which happens in your body is what you eat and what you drink, type of thing. And studying that particular one is really big. And one of the good things is that UNC is one of the foremost institutions where we are looking at nutrition. And I'm happy to that I'm collaborating with them also in this particular sense to figure out how nutrition can actually change and the type of contamination you can get exposed to.
Yeah, I guess that's part of the whole organic movement and trying to get the pesticides out of the food.
Out of the, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in particular, like what you drink, what you eat can have a larger impact in your life. What happens earlier, that too, people are worried about what happens when you're very young. And because some of the contamination which happens when your body is growing, your nervous system is really growing, your brain is really growing, up to around 14, 15, you are actually in a growth stage. After that, it slows down in a sense, but that is a time when things can happen. So if you get exposed to some really bad chemicals, which can have problems, then we can do that. Until now, people have been looking at these things in a reactive fashion. They see some things happening and then they try to figure out what happened there and why it happened, and then try to go there. For example, same thing happens with use of tobacco is leading to cancer, or use of the PFAS has been is leading to cancer, and so on and so forth. Pregnancy and prenatal care and things like that. But what we are trying to do with exposomics is trying to say, can we move away from this reactive type of science to a proactive type of science? Mm-hmm. Can we chart and look at things which are already happening, and then try to find what are the chemicals which are there, what are the top 100 chemicals, maybe top 1,000 chemicals which are really bad for you, and how we can even anticipate what will happen so that don't try to get there, type of thing.
Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the theme of your smart cities class, isn't it, that you teach? The sort of
that is true.
Pollution.
Yeah, in a sense, one of the reasons I got into exposomics is because it is also because of the smart cities type of thing. Because sensing is an important part of smart cities. You are going to sense multiple kinds of things, and one of the things which you really want to sense is pollution. Mm-hmm. Air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution, and other kinds of pollution type of things. And so you are dealing with that one, and that too with urban and built-in environment, and the type of pollution we get exposed to is really too much. For example, you are sitting in your office, and all sorts of things here are happening. Your carpet is having some chemicals coming out of that. You walked in with something, and that something is reacting with what is there. So you don't know what type of chemicals you're having. In your own home, and people have realized it. Having a carpet actually can increase your asthma, can flare up your asthma type of thing. Mm-hmm. So those are the type of things we are looking at, and then obviously that immediately went into how can we do this? How can we measure this? And can we do that? And then I realized that people have been looking at it called exposomics, but people have been looking mainly at the level of organs, at the level of cells and genomics, but not looking at it from the end-to-end type of thing. That's mm-hmm. where I got interested in it. And one reason is that since I come from the data world, I realized that data science is the integrator for all these things. Without data science, you won't be able to do it. If somebody has started to do something like this 10, 15 years back, they won't have that capability to do that. Now with data science and artificial intelligence and machine learning, we can actually tackle this to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, with the advent of all of this data that we're currently producing. So to do a slight shift, it's still in line with your smart cities class and your sort of data science interest. Mm-hmm. I know you're working on a class or teaching a class collaboratively with Maggie Mello, mm-hmm. who it's about makerspaces. So how do you see your expertise as a data scientist fitting into this sort of makerspace world?
Oh, yeah, I felt that there's a very good connection between it, because whenever you are trying to do anything with this one, with sensing, you need to deploy sensors. And makerspace is one way of trying to build things by yourself and then trying to deploy. That's one of the reasons when Maggie and I started looking at it, we said, yeah, sensors are really good, but you also need other things to make it into a platform to make it work. And that's where the combination of makerspace and sensor technology and sensor platforms come together. And one of the main reason I'm also really interested in pulling together the makerspace type of things is that a lot of these type of things needs citizen buy-in. What we call as community scientists to be involved in it. And makerspace are really good at pulling people in so that we can get them to become involved in making things and doing things. And here we are trying to pull them together into a community of practice so that they can say, okay, can I do some sensing in my backyard? And how can I do that? And what are the type of things I can do? So we are basically creating an entrepreneurship type of environment so that people can do that.
And what kinds of things are you making in this space?
For now, our makerspace is basically we're running one lab course on that particular one, and we give students microcontrollers. Microcontrollers are basically small computer on a chip type of thing, and they also have analog and digital inputs, a lot of analog and digital inputs to that, so that you can attach sensors to them, and you can program them and then get data from these sensors and then send it over to a larger computer where you can do analysis on that particular one. So basically, we are having our students build projects. For example, this year, one set of students are basically going to go and find out what type of pollution is happening in our cafeterias, right beside our Manning Hall, and they are going to put some sensors there to figure out what type of things people are breathing when they go in there and out. And another set of people, another set of group of students are looking at how if rainwater is coming in, what type of soil provides you with a good amount of percolation so that water gets absorbed really fast. Because we are in a what do you call a concrete jungle, there is not much space for us to do things in a sense of getting the water absorbed into the things and then going into the soil. And they are looking at what can we replace this concrete so that we can say that, okay, this particular type of soil is really good for that. They are looking at both natural soil as well as artificial soil to see how they can do that. So that are the type of experiments we are basically trying to see, both at the level of soil, both at the level of air. Another set of students are looking at water and so on and so forth.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I think the other thing they're going to have to look at here in North Carolina is how do we replace the actual soil, because it's all clay, so it doesn't percolate anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Water's trying to go through concrete, and then it's trying to go through clay, and eventually it just runs.
And it doesn't do that at all. Yeah, actually, there are systems where you can do type of water sump type of thing in there, so that you can do that and then have a garden on top of it, so that the water gets used in a very effective manner. That's where the smart city type of comes in. Smart cities is not just technology, but basically making use of novel methods so that you can better make use of your resources and sustain them.
Right. Well, unfortunately, Roger, we're running out of time, so I'm going to call it there. I was going to launch into one other thing, but it would take too long for us to discuss it. So we'll save that for another meeting.
Sure.
Next year.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us here. And we'll switch over to our third panelist for today, Rob Capra. Hello. Hello. Hang on just a moment, Rob.
Okay.
There we go. We just needed to get our thumbs up from our people.
All right. Hello.
We were going. Thanks for joining us.
Sure. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here, and not hopefully going to cut you out as well in our Ian extravaganza that we're going through. I can hear it outside now. The wind is picking up a little bit, and the rain is picking up here in Chapel Hill. So I guess it's our turn. Durham was getting it, and now it's our turn.
There's a lot of wind outside.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the trees will stay rooted, and we won't have any problems. So I wanted to start with congratulations on your recent appointment to full professor. That's wonderful.
Thank you. I'm very honored and excited to have been promoted. So yeah.
Well, we're thrilled to have you here. So tell the listeners here and the viewers, tell them a little bit about yourself, if you would, please.
Sure. Well, so as Brian said, I'm a professor here at SILS. I've been here since I've been on the faculty since about 2011, so a number of years. I teach a lot of different classes. I have sort of broad interests. So this semester I'm teaching the new 777 class that's part of our new core curriculum. I'm also teaching a class on machine learning this semester. I often teach classes on databases, and I also have a strong interest in UX and HCI, so I teach classes in those areas as well. And as a fun tidbit, I'll tell people that I'm a big sci-fi geek, and if you stop by my office, you can try to see how many Doctor Who TARDISes there are in my office.
I seem to remember there was at least one that sort of, if you miss it,
there's one that's very big, yes.
Covers half your wall, as I remember. Very obvious. Rob, do you do anything with personal information management?
Yeah, so personal information management has long been an interest of mine. Matter of fact, I used to even teach a class on it that unfortunately we're not offering anymore. But yeah, so personal information management deals with all the things related to how do we manage our own personal information. And that can happen in both personal contexts at home, and it can also happen in personal contexts at work, right? So even in a work environment, you have information that is sort of under your control that you have to figure out how to manage, emails and files and things like that. And so the area of personal information management tries to study that and see what kinds of problems people encounter, how various tools affect what they can and cannot do with the information that they're needing to manage, and hopefully provide some insights into how we can do it better. Yeah.
Well, that brings me again back to something that Mohammad and I were talking about with these digital nomads. How do you think there's going to be a growing concern about personal information management as our workspaces and our personal spaces become lumped into one?
I definitely think so. This is something that was a concern even back 10 years ago, and it's even more so a concern now, I think. The sort of mixing and merging of identity across personal and work boundaries is a really tricky one for a lot of people. It's one that some people are very happy to sort of let it be a very permeable boundary between work and personal spaces. Those tend to be people that identify with their job a lot. So, perhaps people like professors who sort of live our jobs. But then there's other domains where people want to have more separation between their work and personal lives. And managing information across those boundaries is especially hard. And as you said, as we're dealing with more sort of people working at home and digital nomads, and that boundary between the workplace and the home place blurring a little bit, it becomes even more challenging.
Yeah, because in storytelling, we talk about the way in which the context in which you're performing changes, not maybe so much your identity, but the identities or the masks that we wear, right? The social constructions or performances that we put on. And so I'm kind of curious with this personal information management interest you have, the way in which context impacts the kind of information we assemble or think is important, the kind of information we store, the way we store it. I mean, all of those things are, I guess, subject to discussion and exploration. with personal information.
Definitely. And Brian, you're very much on target with the context and the identity. There's that notion of presentation of self, right?
Yeah.
And that comes through in personal information management a lot. One of the things that you find is that people have multiple email accounts, right? You have the email account that is your work persona, and you have an email account that is your personal persona, and then maybe you've got an Instagram account that's more fun and interesting, or maybe you've got a special persona that you use when you're playing World of Warcraft or something like that. And so that was definitely something that was found early on in the study of personal information management, that people were creating these different identities and silos of information to present themselves in different ways to whatever community they were trying to be a part of.
And I suppose the anonymity of the internet as well plays into that, and that you can, with an anonymous identity, you can be anyone.
Sure. On the internet, nobody knows your dog, right?
That's right. So let's backtrack a little bit. Before you came and joined SILS, you had a corporate research life. I know you were working at SBC Communications, doing voice user interfaces and speech recognition. I mean, all natural language processing, which is interesting because when I was looking at your bio for this, I thought, I had no idea Rob did all of this stuff. This is really cool. So can you tell us a little bit about your corporate research life?
Sure, yeah. So in between my master's degree and PhD, I worked for a while in corporate research. I worked for a company called SBC Communications, which is now merged back up with AT&T. I don't know if people remember how all the AT&T children split off into what they called baby bells. So SBC was one of the baby bells. Now they've all merged back together. But it was a really exciting time to be working in telecommunications because the internet had just really gotten into its fore then. This was in the mid 90s that I worked there. So the internet was new. Speech recognition was something that was just becoming feasible to deploy in applications in limited ways. And it's not like what we think of with Siri today. This was, basic stuff like, can I recognize one or two words, or can I recognize digits that somebody is saying? And if I can string together and recognize a sentence, that's a big deal. So we were really kind of pioneering, if I can say that, some of the types of interfaces that might be used for people to talk to computers over a telephone. We had services that allowed you to do voice dialing. We were designing systems that would allow you to do other kinds of interactions, talk about things like dates and times and planning and call direction and things like that. And this was all brand new, and it was a really thrilling time to be involved in that industry.
So, that I remember the early telephone dialing, auto dialing, where you'd speak the number instead of punch the number.
Right.
I remember the time when we went from dialing phones, right, rotary phones, to the numerical push dials. So I guess that dates me quite easily. But that shift from physically entering a number to vocally entering a number, I thought was amazing. And now, I mean, with Siri and all these other things, we've got technologies that are actually processing human speech. Do you find in your work that they are pretty powerful? I mean, are they accurate? Are they?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have noticed this, especially over the last few years during the pandemic, right? Because more and more, as we've been on Zoom, people are being exposed to the capabilities that we have to do automatic transcription now. All it takes is click a button on Zoom, and you can turn on an automatic transcription that is not 100% accurate, but it's up there, right? And so the processing gains and the computational gains that we've made in the last 20 years or so have really, really fostered improvements in accuracy in the ability to transcribe human speech.
Yeah. So I know there's facial recognition too. So there's the visual component of this now. And as we increasingly become a society that is wedded to our computers and wedded to our phones and constantly on the internet and doing video and interacting with each other digitally. Is the equivalent going to take place, do you think, that the same sort of effort that went into speech recognition and speech interaction is now going to be moving toward facial recognition, not just to recognize a human, whether it's human or a dog or whatever, but actually to start recognizing emotions, to interpreting the things that are going on? Is that kind of capture of
I think we're already seeing those things. One of the kinds of inputs, and this gets into areas that we need to have debates about. Some people don't want to have a computer understanding their emotions while they're using it, but in other cases you might benefit from that. But yes, those are definitely things that we're already seeing progress on research to do in the area of HCI, human computer interaction. For quite a while now, you've been able to use software that will automatically detect sort of what emotional state a person is in just from their facial expressions.
Yeah.
You can time sync that when you're doing a study in the lab or something like that to see, oh, is this a point in time where they got confused or upset while they were trying to use this interface? That gives us an indication that we need to make some improvement in the interface at that point. So I think we're going to see lots more of those kinds of technologies. And as I said, we're going to need to have a lot of discussions about where they're appropriate and where they're not.
Yeah. Well, I was talking in my storytelling class last night about emotions and how we express them and the facial expressions that go. And there's some wonderful articles and work done on how we express emotions and how we interpret them, and how culturally those can be either cross-cultural so that everybody has the same basic understanding of certain emotional facial expressions, or cultural specific, right? And that a particular facial expression is interpreted uniquely to that culture.
Right.
But what really struck me was this sense that for a long time there has been the belief that there were between 6 and 8 primary emotions made by facial expressions. And when we started talking that over in a class, I said, all right, let me put one of those on and see what you think. I'm not going to tell you what it is. See if you can interpret it. And invariably, there are lots of different interpretations.
Exactly. I was going to say that one of the things that I think people sometimes forget about when they talk about recognizing emotions or recognizing speech or anything else is that even as humans, we're not perfect at this. But we developed and we have mechanisms and we have principles of interaction that help us to smooth those things out. If I don't understand every single word you say, I can use the context to still make a good response to you. If I don't quite understand what emotion you're conveying, I can still respond to you in a reasonable way. And that's something that we're going to need to work on with computing.
Yeah, otherwise we'll have our computers shouting at us.
Instead of us shouting at them.
That's right. That's right. Well, I guess fair is fair, right? All back to Mohammed's balance. So I want to give you a moment here at the end of our conversation to talk about either other work that we haven't talked about yet, or where your work's going in the future. What are your sort of future plans?
Sure. That's a great question. I'm going to kind of use this as a chance to highlight some work of the PhD students in our lab, because I always like to say that one of the best parts about being a faculty member is to see where your PhD students are going to lead you. And so we've got some really, really neat things going on. Jaime Arguello and I have a lab where we study interactive information retrieval. So this is all about interfaces for people to get at information. So, search assistance tools, systems to help people while they're doing complex searches. One of the ones I'll highlight is my PhD student, Austin Ward, is working on a project that we're calling immersive search. So, virtual reality systems are becoming, kind of a hot thing these days, and they're much more affordable than they used to be. And kind of like speech was back, 20 years or so ago, we don't really have a lot of conventions, rules about how we're going to interact with things in virtual environments yet. Those are things that are to be determined. And so one of the things that Austin is working on is, well, let's say you're in a virtual environment and you need to do a search. How does that work? How do you present search results to someone in a virtual environment? You know, in a web browser, we all know what those look like. There's 10 blue links and there's some ads over here and there's a little, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
But in a virtual environment, you got a whole screen that could wrap around the person. And how should we present those results? And what are some of the ramifications of doing that? And what do people think the ordering of those results even looks like? Is it the upper left-hand corner that's the top result? Or, you know, again, you talked about the cultural issues. Maybe that's a cultural thing, that maybe in Western cultures, we think that the top left-hand corner should be the top result, but maybe not. Maybe they're clustered in some way.
Right.
So Austin's doing some really cool work in that area. I don't know if we have time. I'll mention one other.
Sure.
So my student, Yuan Lee, is working on a really interesting project related to what we call cross-session searches. So, you know, it's very often the case that we do some kind of bigger task that involves us searching a little bit here, and then we go and work on the task for a while, and then we find out something, we have to go search for some more information. You know, there's sort of this interplay between the task we're trying to do and the searching that we're trying to do. And Yuan is doing some really, really pioneering work to understand how those two things fit together and how they influence each other. So for a while, people have been interested in sort of task resumption or search resumption, when you come back and start searching for the same topic. But a lot of that work has been thinking like, oh, I should just show you the same kind of things you were seeing before. What Yuan is finding is, no, it really depends on what happened in between. You know, maybe the thing that you were looking for before didn't work. And so I don't want to see any more of those things. I want to go in a completely new direction. And so Yuan's work is really focusing on trying to understand sort of that interplay between what happens in between the sessions and how those influence what happens in the next search session.
Right. That's fascinating. I've done a little work with AI myself, and it's a wonderful research space. Well, Rob, I'm gonna circle back. I started with congratulations. I'll end with congratulations on your upcoming research leave. I hope it's an incredibly productive time for you, and one filled with all sorts of intriguing possibilities, because you certainly have mentioned a lot of them there that are intriguing. So I hope you have fun on that.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us. And that concludes our Ask Me Anything for today. I'd like to thank all of you viewers for joining us today. Thank our panelists once again for joining us today. And I wish you all a good weekend that is not too waterlogged, and hopefully no trees or branches down on your property or your cars or anything like that. So thank you all for joining us.